Well, we can talk now to Congressman Brendan Boyle. He's a Democrat from Pennsylvania. Congressman, thanks very much for joining me. When you hear the president's tone there and you see the reaction to that tone, I imagine that Democrats might be thinking, gosh, this is somebody who it would be difficult for us to run against in November's elections.
Well, and thank you for having me, Katty. The reality is, though, one speech sticking on teleprompter a presidency does not make. There's a difference between teleprompter Trump and tweeting Trump. And the reality is the Trump that you see on Twitter, the Trump that you see the other 99% of the time, is who Trump is. So while he can, for one night, stick to a script, that all goes out the window the very next day. And if we look back on the past year, I remember back to a year ago after his State of the Union address when he was given fairly high marks. He stuck on script, and within a few days that was all gone. And the rest of the year looked very different from that State of the Union address.
Although, to be fair, there have not been any tweets of that nature during the course of today. But if you combine that, it's not just the tone of this speech. It's the fact that the economy is doing well, that he can point to the stock market, that he can say to Americans, look, things are humming along under my administration. I've cut regulations. I've done the tax cuts. That's what people really like. And we can see the numbers showing that.
Well, we are in now the 8th year of an economic expansion that began roughly when President Obama took over, or about 6 months into his administration when the Great Recession bottomed out. Job growth is continuing at roughly the pace it has for the last 5 years, though at a slightly slower pace. So what we're really seeing is the continuation and probably the tail end of an economic expansion. Now, he might want to be a little bit too careful about putting all of his eggs in the basket of the economy, because we've never seen an economic expansion that's lasted 12 years. We have seen this one that's lasted 8 or 9. So for now, he's able to claim some credit for the economy. However, the reality is he inherited an economic expansion that was already happening for 7.5 years before he took office.
Congressman, one of the areas that there will need to be compromises, of course, on immigration, and the president was setting out some of his proposals, some of his reforms last night. Let's just watch what the reaction was in the chamber.
Under the current broken system, a single immigrant can bring in virtually unlimited numbers of distant relatives. Under our plan, we focus on the immediate family by limiting sponsorships to spouses and minor children.
So that's where some of the difficulty is. But when you look at the speech in the whole, Congressman, I mean, there's things like prison reform, big infrastructure projects, family credits, things that people want to see where you could work with this president. And if you don't, then you might look obstructionist.
Well, let me, two things on that. First, when he addressed the family reunification aspect of our immigration policy, Donald Trump and I have something in common. Neither he nor I would be here in the United States if family reunification were not a part of our immigration policies. Both his family and mine were helped by that aspect in previous generations. The second point I would make is I am someone who wants to work with this White House when it comes to infrastructure. I was very excited last year in his speech when he talked about infrastructure. I wrote to the White House with a group of Democratic members saying we want to reach out and work with you. A whole year has gone by and not one bill has been brought to the Hill that would address our infrastructure needs. So I hope now in 2018 he reaches out to us, not just in a speech, but in terms of policy and legislation, because if we're going to get a meaningful infrastructure bill done, it needs to be bipartisan, and there needs to be a plan. He cited $1.5 trillion in his speech. Where is that coming from? We just had a GOP tax plan that blew a $1.5 trillion deficit, a hole in the deficit. So it remains to be seen where this $1.5 trillion will come from.
Okay, Congressman Boyle, thank you very much.